Do you ever feel unheard, unrecognized, or just generally unimportant to the people who you think should probably care the most? Like you can't even bring up something that's been weighing on your heart because every time you start to talk about it, the loved one changes the topic or interrupts you or is fidgeting around on their phone. Maybe you blame yourself or you start to suspect that they don't really care. You tell yourself, real loved ones listen. This loved one doesn't listen? So is this loved one even a loved one? Your frustration is real, and the stress on your relationship that you feel is also real, but the problem isn't necessarily that they don't care. Okay, of course it's possible that they don't care, but that's not what we're going to be focusing on here. For the sake of the argument, let's assume that they probably actually care, or think they care about you, but maybe they've developed some bad habits, okay? What if instead of you or your friends, the focus should be on the system itself? We live in a contextual world that influences and encourages certain behaviors while discouraging others. As subjects who live in the neoliberal phase of capitalism, we find ourselves online a lot. So what is this internet thing anyway? Sharing information, connecting with friends, buying things? The list goes on. But what makes the web possible? People pooling their knowledge and skills to enrich one another's lives? Yes, but we don't just do this in a free space. The spaces online are all made possible by platform capitalists. What are platform capitalists, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I just read a book about it by Nick Cernicek. Platform capitalism is where many of the world's most powerful businesses are not providing goods or services so much as platforms upon which others can then provide goods or services. Netflix, Uber, Google, Facebook, and Amazon are all distinct in that they are competing not to provide us with commodities so much as a monopolized platform where we can get what we want. What is it we want? Increasingly, distraction. Alongside, of course, recognition, connection, maybe a new dress or a video game. But what is it the company wants? Platform capitalists provide simulations of recognition, social capital lotteries, quick gratifications of curiosity, or other forms of distraction, almost always for free. Free? No, not for free. They do it in exchange for a newly discovered and incredibly powerful resource, data. But what is data? Well, I'm happy you asked, because it turns out data is not just information of any type. It's actually a less threatening word that stands for something a little more ominous. The recordings of human behavior that empower its analysts to track, predict, and engineer human society.
We rely on things like electronic cards, internet accounts, codes, and mobile services, which can be shut off at any moment. Thus, the exercise of power no longer requires direct physical intervention. Instead, it can be exercised merely through the manipulation of flows of information. It is common for people to undermine the extent of this, but consider, for example, the fact that, at least in the US, your internet service provider collects your browsing data, and it is perfectly legal for them to sell it to both corporations and governments. The amount of US government requests for private Facebook data has been steadily increasing, with 34,000 requests in 2017. 85% of such requests were granted by Facebook, without requiring you to consent or even be informed about it. Microsoft, Google, and Apple also all send data about their users to the government, each granting more than half of government requests for such data. And it's not confined to social media either. As shown by the example of the Golden State Killer, if you have relatives who have used DNA testing,
we trade our patterns of behavior in exchange for access to the web. It's kind of like living in a surveillance state, except we're less fearful because it's really just so companies can target us with their marketing. Google sells the data to businesses that sell what you want. What's so harmful about that? Most of what we seek online is to fill a void that the web is unable to really fulfill. We go to the web to find ourselves, but instead we are sold identities through identification with products and icons. Peter Coffin is undoubtedly the best resource for learning about how this commodity identification cultivation thing works. We also go to the web for confirmation of our biases or distraction. We are sold distraction from boredom, depression, anxiety, loneliness, and the ever-present and inescapable possibility of our own demise. If attention is currency in the marketplace of ideas, then what do we purchase with it? Distraction and identification. What we experience as attention is valuable to companies insofar as it allows them to record our behavior. We're basically always being surveyed, and the answer to these surveys are worth a lot to tech companies. But all these different companies want our attention, which means they have to compete. The most powerful companies have literally been hiring the most educated and sophisticated psychologists to figure out ways to manipulate us, to lure us in, and to get us addicted to their content or services. Entertainment made for immediate gratification of curiosity or relief from boredom is generally pretty superficial, composed of cheap thrills, trivial knowledge, or identification. Identification is the sense of, I am this. I am not that. I am this. I'm not that. Online, we are not in communities, but what Peter Coffin calls validation gangs, where the people we tend to associate with make us feel self-assured about our product choices. Oh, you like Fortnite? Me too! We should be friends! Oh, you love to hate Trump? Me too! We should be friends! But this kind of friendship is really just based on how you fill the void left by the absence of real relationships. Socializing as shopping for confirmation bias.
I'm still excited by technology, but I believe, and I'm here to make the case, that we're letting it take us places that we don't want to go. Over the past 15 years, I've studied technologies of mobile communication, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, young and old, about their plugged-in lives.
Sherry Turkle is a psychologist and sociologist who spent the last 15 years or so studying the ways this media ecology affects human relationships. She went from being an optimistic advocate for technology to something of an alarmist. Her research, and the research she cites, claims the mere presence of a smartphone on a tabletop lowers the degree to which people commit to a conversation. How often do you reach for your phone while other people are talking? Even when the phone isn't present, we've been trained to expect immediate gratification of any and every passing interest. We expect immediate gratification of our curiosity, and the moment something ceases to interest us, we expect an immediate replacement to hold our interest. We expect, and so long as that is normally satisfied, we feel entitled to the continuation of that satisfaction. We feel entitled to constant entertainment and satisfaction of passing interests. The moment the person you're talking to ceases to fulfill these criteria, on to the next thing. Pick up the phone, change the topic. But real conversations happen over time. Real conversations get past the awkward moments. What happens when we're not getting past the awkward moments? What happens when we're avoiding vulnerability? What happens when we're perpetually fleeing boredom or angst as entitled consumers of distraction? Lots happens. We're going to focus on just a couple of those things though, because, well, there are limitations to the length of this video, and some of the other things that happen are themselves good enough for entire videos to talk about, and so we'll save those for other conversations. And if this is all interesting to you and you haven't clicked on the dang bell already beside the subscribe button, then do it, because otherwise the YouTube algorithm will bury me, and I will cease to exist for you. Don't let that happen. Do not let that happen. Solitude and solicitude. For now, let's focus on what Turkle calls the virtuous circle and how the attention economy and our gadgets impact it. The virtuous circle is between 2 points, solitude and solicitude. Those are fancy words for being with oneself and being with others. Solitude is not the same as being alone, isolated, lonely, or lost. It's also not the same as neglect.
Solitude doesn't necessarily mean a lack of activity. You know you are experiencing solitude when what you are doing brings you back to yourself. The writer Susan Cain has persuasively argued that solitude is important for introverts and that introverts are a significant number among us. Solitude is important for everyone, including the most extroverted people. It's the time you become familiar and comfortable with yourself, and developing the capacity for solitude is one of the most important tasks of childhood, every childhood. It's the capacity for solitude that allows you to reach out to others and see them as separate and independent. You don't need them to be anything other than who they are. This means you can listen to them and hear what they have to say. This makes the capacity for solitude essential for the development of empathy. And this is why solitude marks the beginning of the conversation's virtuous circle. If you are comfortable with yourself, you can put yourself in someone else's place.
Solitude is a fullness, not a lack. It's when you find yourself interesting, imaginative, creative, and reflective. Here, you build a continuous or chronological sense of self, confidence in oneself as interesting, and worthy of respect and recognition. In solitude, I learn I have something to offer others, and this enriches social contact with others. Solitude thus feeds solicitude, which then feeds solitude with new experiences to reflect upon, digest, and synthesize. Turkle claims that this develops empathy. Once you know you have something to offer, you are less likely to posture, see others as threats or as mere mirrors for your own narcissistic self-interest. Once you've learned how to listen to yourself, you learn how to listen to others. But solitude doesn't come easily, and is instead developed over time as you learn to sit through the boredom, overcome the loneliness, and weather the anxiety.
And this is where the virtuous circle breaks down. Afraid of being alone, we struggle to pay attention to ourselves. And what suffers is our ability to pay attention to each other. If we can't find our own center, we lose confidence in what we have to offer others. Or you can work the circle the other way. We struggle to pay attention to each other, and what suffers is our ability to know ourselves. We face a flight from conversation that is also a flight from self-reflection, empathy, and mentorship. But this flight is not inevitable. When the virtuous circle is broken, conversation cures.
Martin Heidegger says that the kind of being unique to humans, Dasein, experiences a sense of incessant falling into superficiality. The movement of this falling comes from the reciprocally determinative process of idle chatter, pursuit of immediate distractions, and ambiguous or perpetually ironic and superficial exchanges. For Heidegger, humans flee into this falling motion to distract oneself from the existential sense of dread imposed by subconscious death anxiety. Death anxiety for Heidegger has to do with the possible impossibility of the things we care about. Fleeing into the falling of theyness is a way of playing it safe. Instead of committing to something, we float along listlessly. Maybe existential death is the basis of a sense of anxiety or boredom when we're alone, or maybe that's repressed sexuality, stifled will to power, or something else. Either way, we have a huge motivation to flee being alone with oneself. Instead, we flee into distraction. Sherry Turkle claims studies show cell phones complicate this dynamic by undermining the likelihood that we will overcome boredom and discover ourselves creatively worthy of interest. If we don't find ourselves interesting, how do we expect others to find us interesting? Distraction from boredom and loneliness leads to boredom with others too. Without patience and perseverance in cultivating a deeper sense of self, empathy itself is undermined. Instead of learning how deep we can go with ourselves or our passions, we spend our time living on the surface. If we stay on the surface all the time, the surface of representation and spectacle, we are unable to imagine the depths of difference lived in others. And really quick, I just need to make a note to say, for Turkle, as well as the way I'm using this, obviously this virtuous circle between solitude and solicitude, being with oneself and being with others, is not something where it's like, oh, now you've achieved solitude and now you are an authentic individual who can then enter the social and always have something to contribute. It doesn't work that way. It's an ongoing, iterative process that one must develop habits around. So it's never over. I don't have any examples that come to mind of someone who's like mastered this. This is just a thing. And you can be better at it or worse. And different people's struggles regarding this will be different. Different people's challenges within this dynamic will be different. More intense or less. Kind of depends. So why do elites in Silicon Valley, literally the ones conspiring on our attention and our ability to focus, ban cell phones in their own children's schools? Because it's addicting and undermines our ability to form healthier human attachments. Why don't they just focus on apps that better serve human well-being? 2 reasons. First, this is capitalism. So they have to focus on monopolizing power and prioritizing profit, or else they'll lose, because it's a sink or swim arms race to the top, and they benefit from addicted, entitled, and distractible consumers. Second, beyond the mere fact that this is capitalism, they are trying to provide a service to satisfy a need that is fundamentally undermined by capitalism itself. What does that mean, though? What human need? Sustained effort towards the development of familial, communal, and cultural belonging. Because our time energy in a week is fundamentally colonized by capital. Because profit is fundamentally the alienated extra time energy left over after a week's average work. Because capital stultifies our possibilities of self-directed and purposeful investments of time energy, we're left with time without energy or energy without time, which serves superficial and pathological attachment styles, not sustained effort towards relationship building practices. So yeah, we have a need, and capitalism tries to satisfy the need, but it can't, because it is a need created by capital in the first place. So even when the tech giants start to say, oh my god, we feel kind of bad about what we've done, we need to make this platform a little less addicting and noxious, we'll still be over here like, so why am I so precarious and alienated still? And the answer will be this goddamn system. I am not proposing we interrogate the system so we can simply blame everything on a system that is too large to change. Yes, we need to rewire the system itself to stop producing such a culture of distraction, to stop preying on our weaknesses, etc. But what about immediately? What should we do now? As an individual person who wants to build more meaningful relationships, what can you do? One thing you might think about doing is to try sharing this video and saying that it's something that you've been feeling, and if other people are feeling it, they should reach out to you, and maybe you could go out for coffee and have a conversation about it. Another thing you could do before trying to reach out for contact with other people is do a little bit more self-care. And in that self-care, don't bring your phone. See about spending your time writing poetry or in a journal or painting or meditating or nature walking, or there's all sorts of different ways of doing this. And I'm not saying that one is necessarily better than another, but I do think one that you might be interested in is actually reading people who talk about and research stuff like this. I'm holding Sherry Turkle's Alone Together. She also wrote a book called Reclaiming Conversation. I don't own a copy of it. It's on Audible though, and I've listened to it there a couple of times. And I think that learning to read and exercising your reading comprehension, which means always kind of taking on challenges that are difficult to focus on, is part of learning how to listen. And listening comprehension itself is kind of what we're talking about. If people have lost the ability to listen to anything that they're not immediately interested in, then perhaps a part of pushing back against that tendency is learning how to read again. Maybe if you learn how to read, you will learn how to follow a lengthier chain of thought that is necessary for getting into the deeper territory also of following someone down where they are at, learning to see things the way they're seeing it, and understanding where they're coming from. Your friends care about you, so let them know that you feel like the distraction that pervades society today is undermining your ability to build relationships or feel heard. Ask them to be more conscious of this. Ask them to commit to focusing on one another when you're together. Maybe try to tell your friends you've noticed everyone seems so much more distracted and unheard. Ask if they've noticed this. Ask if they feel it. Either way, tell them you want to commit to focusing more on one another when it comes time to share important time. Tell people you're committed to giving attention to the people you're with and ask them to do the same. Finally, one practice I've found useful is what Sherry Turkle calls the 10-minute rule. If you're in a conversation and the other person is boring, or if it's gotten awkward and you're sitting here reaching for your phone and you're going to start doing stuff on there, wait. Be as patient with that other person as you would hope that they would be with you, and instead focus on them, even if they're messing around on their phone. Be present to them and give it 10 minutes. The reason, I guess 10 minutes is an arbitrary number, but there's something to it. If you can push past the initial awkwardness, if you can push past the initial boredom, you might be surprised what you find on the other side. People have depths. Hidden depths to themselves, and our consumer entitlement that has been inculcated by this noxious system gets in the way of us opening ourselves to that part of the other person that is deeper than whatever it is we're looking to fulfill our own passing interest. Take a chill pill, breathe a little bit, see what they say, and hope that they'll do the same for you. And if they don't, ask them to. And then if they don't, well, maybe try a bit more. And if it's getting to the point where they're just not able to, maybe they spend too much time online. Maybe they spend too much time self-absorbed. Maybe you're a friend with a narcissist. Who knows? I think we're all a bit narcissistic nowadays. I know that I am. The thing is I work towards pushing back against these tendencies. I think that we can all always practice a little bit more of that before this goddamn system robs us of whatever humanity we have left. If you love content like this, make sure to thank somebody who pledges their support on Patreon to artists such as myself, or Matt Blender, or Peter Coffin. We all have to pay bills, and those small pledges really free up a lot of time, energy, and attention for bigger projects like this. Thank you. Also, this was not sponsored by Audible. I just love Audible, and you should listen to Sherry Turkle's books because your listening comprehension is as important as your reading comprehension.